Hey everyone, remember the 80s? Remember Ghostbusters? How about Back to the Future? You love Back to the Future, right? Look, we passed the date in Back to the Future too. Cool. Still no real hoverboards though. What a drag. Remember Transformers? Did you cry when Optimus Prime died? I sure did. Hey, remember the Iran-Contra affair? Huh? Okay, what about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Cowabunga, dudes! Remember the Power Glove? Remember the decline of American industry? Remember all that music we can't actually play for copyright reasons? Remember the brutal meat grinder of the Iran-Iraq War? Remember the troubles in Northern Ireland? Hey, that doesn't sound like nostalgic pop culture references. I'm here to talk about Ghostbusters and Back to the Future. You remember Back to the Future, right? Please say you remember Back to the Future. Don't start thinking about the reality of the past, because then it ceases to become an imaginary place where you can take refuge from the modern world of cyclical economic catastrophes, rising authoritarianism and corruption, and a once-in-a-lifetime global pandemic. Please, I'm begging you, remember Ghostbusters. Remember Ninja Turtles and Transformers. For the love of God, please act like Back to the Future was more of a cultural powerhouse than it actually was. I need this. I need you to appreciate my constant references to the most popular 80s pop culture franchises, because it's all I have to compensate for my lack of a personality. Please. Alright, seriously folks, this video is about an 80s phenomenon, so I couldn't resist taking a shot at over-commercialized 80s nostalgia. To be fair, people's fondness for the 1980s is not entirely unwarranted. It's seen by many as a type of golden age of media, and not just because of the films or music that was being produced at the time. In this case, the real breakthrough was in media itself. For music, it was the era of the compact cassette and later CD. The VHS format conquered its rival Betamax and revolutionized both home video and the pornography industry. Video games, both in the arcade and on home systems, featured better, colorful graphics so that characters were no longer monochrome blocks and games could actually tell stories visually. But in this video, we're going to be looking at an all but forgotten convergence of the VHS and home video game revolutions. You see, the rise of VHS wasn't just a game changer for consumers and big Hollywood studios, but also any would-be producers, regardless whether they were professionals, amateurs, pornographers, or non-pornographers. Almost anyone could produce a video about virtually anything, from training and instructional films to marketing presentations and bizarre vanity projects. If you ever want to get a good idea of the range of content that was produced in VHS format, your best bet would be to go watch Red Letter Media's Wheel of the Worst series. While VHS tapes were being cranked out left and right, the mid-1980s was also the dawn of the 8-bit era of home video games, led by the Nintendo Entertainment System. More challenging, complex games created demand for help that would come in the form of strategy guides and hotlines where you could speak to official Nintendo game counselors. There are two small problems, though. Game counselors relied on the player's descriptions of what they saw, and printed strategy guides could only show you maps and static screenshots. How would you know, for example, exactly how a certain boss moves or reacts to the player's actions? It was only a matter of time before some geniuses figured, hey, why not make a video game strategy guide on a VHS tape? And so were born the game tapes. VHS tapes of people playing video games with a voiceover explaining what to do. Basically the ancestor of today's YouTube walkthrough or Let's Play. And like Let's Plays, some of these videos were, well, not great. Now, when I was a kid, I knew these tapes existed when they came out in the 80s, but I never really encountered them until one early 90s summer. You see, as a kid, there were very few sources of entertainment at the time, especially when you get tired of running around outside in the triple-digit heat.
111 degrees? Phoenix can't really be that hot, can it? Oh my God, it's like standing on the sun!
This city should not exist. It is a monument to man's arrogance.
I didn't have cable TV, I only had a few movies and books, and a handful of NES games. But I loved anything video game related, and I found a couple of these game tapes during trips with my grandparents to the weekend swap meet. Even though I didn't have most of the games that were on them, and in some cases I had never played them, it did inspire me to rent some of them later. It didn't take too long to totally forget about those tapes for years, until I was reminded of them many years later by the comedy writer Sean Baby, who wrote this really great series of articles about these tapes. In fact, he even reviewed one of the tapes I'd owned, so it was really relatable seeing that someone else had experienced this and noted some of the same weird details I had noticed in my childhood. I've actually linked that article in the description below this video, so you should check it out later. Now obviously, I don't have these videos anymore, but thankfully they've been preserved on YouTube. And so now we can take a walk down memory lane and experience all the nostalgia and unintentional hilarity of these two game tapes that I once owned and cherished for one summer. First, we'll be looking at Game Player's Game Tape Volume 1 Number 6, part of a series of VHS tapes produced by Game Player's magazine. I can't really say much about the magazine as I don't remember ever reading it. It always seemed to be overshadowed by more popular publications such as Nintendo Power, GamePro, and Electronic Gaming Monthly. This particular tape was entirely dedicated to Ultra games. Ultra was a subsidiary of Konami, which was created for the sole purpose of getting around Nintendo's limitations on third-party developers publishing their games in the North American market. Games from some of Konami's biggest series were sometimes originally released under the Ultra label rather than the parent brand. This tape features 4 NES titles: Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Metal Gear, Skate or Die, and Defender of the Crown. It also features a lot of ads in between. Now right from the start, there's something you gotta know about this tape. It has the most irritating, clownish, bizarre circus music you will ever hear. I remember when I watched this for the first time and the volume was up, and it took all of my restraint not to burst out with laughter at the sheer sonic absurdity of it. I'm gonna give you 3 seconds to prepare yourself for this intro.
Welcome to the official Ultra Game Tape. You'll see how
to beat the Ninja Turtles.
Okay, so how'd you do? Still sane? Good, let's move on. The tape begins with some fairly decent general advice, read the game's instruction manual, and have some familiarity playing the game beforehand. The first game up is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which was the only game on this tape that I actually owned and had played extensively at the time. Now, if any of you remember this game, you know it was ridiculously hard. In the late 80s, Ninja Turtles was dominating kids' entertainment. In 1989, Konami released this incredible 4-player Ninja Turtles game for arcades, and naturally, when little me heard there was an NES game, I couldn't wait to try it. By which I mean I couldn't wait till some friend of mine got it because I didn't have my own NES back then. Until late 1990, when a version of the arcade game was ported to the NES, this was the only Ninja Turtles game on the 8-bit system. And if you were 7 or 8, this game would absolutely destroy you. It starts off easily enough until you get to the infamous second level, where you encounter the water level from hell. You have 2 minutes and 20 seconds to disarm 8 bombs or it's game over. Either you had a map or you relied on rote memorization based on trial and error. Otherwise, you were stuck on this level. I had acquired my own copy of this game in the early 90s, sometime just before I got the game tape, although I can't say for sure whether it was the tape's advice that finally got me past that hellish water level. To its credit, the tape is pretty well organized, starting out with a rundown of the 4 turtles and their pros and cons. As far as player skill and tips, I don't see many groundbreaking secrets in this section. For example, they don't use this cheap tactic on Rocksteady where you stand on the crates and hit him with Donatello. To the player's credit, however, they handle that boss pretty well. There's also a little trick in the second level where you can skip to the door by jumping straight up from the floor, but I honestly can't remember how to do that myself. Now we get to the infamous water level. If you were hoping for a solution or strategy here, you'd have been disappointed.
swim clear of the electrical currents and don't get pulled down into the seaweed. There's a time limit here too, so defuse the bomb quickly or you'll be turtle soup.
Your best bet would have been a map like this one in this 1989 issue of Nintendo Power. With the infamous dam level behind us, we begin to see some of the flaws in this tape. Here's a little sample in the third level. Despite having the luxury of video, one problem with these game tapes is that they'd often do something like this.
Blowing up roadblocks requires missiles, and here's where you get them. You don't have time to explore every building in New York, so let's look at the really important ones. Don't waste your time in this room.
Do we know this room is in the building we saw earlier? Obviously nobody was going to make a full playthrough of the game like what we have now on YouTube, but do you think in games like this, where it's not simply left to right platforming, they do a little more to orient the viewer? As a kid, I actually remember rewatching parts of the video to make sure I was entering the right building in this stage, like some kind of primitive OSINT geolocation. To be fair, however, this tape is by no means the worst offender in this category. That's coming later. Another persistent issue is the lack of syncing between the video, sound, and narration. Most of the time it's not much of a problem, but check out what happens when it's telling you about your greatest challenge, that being the Mecha Turtle boss at the end of level 3.
You're about to face your greatest challenge so far, Mecha Turtle. Begin with Donatello and tag team to another ninja when his energy starts dropping. Use throwing weapons if you have it.
See the problem here? If you hadn't made it to this point, you wouldn't even know what the boss looks like, and you get no idea of his attack patterns. Apart from these issues, this segment is fairly helpful considering the era in which it was made. It does go all the way to the very end of the game, and shows you how to beat the final boss. And I did manage to beat this game precisely one time back then, so I guess it did its job. Now before we get to my favorite part of the video, it's time to talk about one of its major issues apart from the insane intro music. The video is loaded with ads between each segment, and they haven't aged well. The first ad is one for Ultra Games, which makes sense as that's the theme of the tape. 80s video game ads are generally cringy, and this one's no exception.
I'm the creator of Ultra Games for Nintendo.
Yeah, I doubt it.
Defender of the Crown.
Defender of the Crown? Just what accent are you going for there, buddy? Alright, this next line is gold.
And skate or die.
Love it.
Check out Ultra Games. Remember, I'm never farther than your TV.
And that sounds pretty creepy, dude. So with that insanity out of the way, we come to my favorite part of the tape, both then and now, which is, of course, Metal Gear. I had first tried Metal Gear in a Nintendo store when I was maybe 6, and couldn't really appreciate any game that wasn't a simple platformer or shooter, so I pretty much forgot about it. But this tape reintroduced me to the game years later, and I loved it. It inspired me to actually play the game, and I can honestly say I probably would never have become a Metal Gear fan had I not been so enamored with the NES version so many years ago. So I guess you could say this tape is
Pretty good.
Now the thing about Metal Gear is that it's a game that really doesn't lend itself well to a VHS tape guide like this. Not only is it too long, but you have even more of a problem with figuring out exactly how to get places they're showing you. Now again, the next tape we're going to look at is much worse in this respect, but it's still an issue in this video.
Card number 2. Surrender in this truck by entering and waiting until the guard captures you.
I think the funniest thing in this segment is the part where you have to destroy the supercomputer. In case you don't know the history, the NES version of Metal Gear didn't have enough memory to actually have the Metal Gear weapon as a boss. So what you do have is this supercomputer that is building Metal Gear. The procedure for destroying it involves talking to the daughter of the scientist Dr. Petrovich, then Dr. Petrovich himself, and then he tells you to use 16 plastic explosive charges on the computer itself. Now the computer can't fight back or anything, but for some reason the video makers felt the need to go through the entire process of laying every single explosive charge on the supercomputer and destroying it.
Plant 16 plastic explosives on the computer, then get out of there.
They are nothing if not thorough. Next up, we have another ad, of course.
If you like this game tape, you'll love Game Player's Pro Tip Hotline. Now you can hear the tips you want to know just by pushing a button on your telephone.
I've been waiting to hear from you.
Wow. Okay, next we have Skate or Die. And I'm going to be honest, I played the game and I can't say this tape really helped much. To be fair, I didn't read the manual and they tell you to do just that in the beginning of the tape, so I guess that one's on me. I will say whoever was playing the game seemed to really know what they were doing. Also, I've been waiting a long time to say this, but does anybody find the skate shop guy looks like Rodney Dangerfield?
Here's Rodney again.
Oh, and by the way,
he's a Marine.
Okay, we have one last game and it turns out to be probably the least suited for this video. It's the strategy game Defender of the Crown. If you're not familiar with it, it's basically a turn-based strategy game with what appears to be some inspiration from the classic novel Ivanhoe.
Ivanhoe is a story of a Russian farmer and his tool.
Seriously though, I don't know why they chose this game. It's not like they didn't have other Ultra games to go with in 1989. Look, they actually had Qbert. Remember Qbert? Anyway, by far the funniest thing about this part of the video is that Defender of the Crown has this really memorable yet repetitive theme song. And as the narrator is going on about each player character's strengths and weaknesses, that song is playing the entire time. You really have to just watch part of it to see how annoying it gets.
Geoffrey Longsword is a great swordsman, but falls short in other areas. Don't choose him as a character, but keep him in mind when picking a jousting opponent. You may be tempted to choose Wulfric the Wild because of his excellent jousting skills. Remember, however, that he's not much of a leader or swordsman. Pass over Wulfric the Wild for a better all-round character. Cedric of Rotherwood, on the other hand, is gifted
in the areas Wulfric is not. He has considerable talents, but not in the right combination.
The man who can best lead you to the crown is Wilfred of Ivanhoe, who isn't strong in any one skill, but can probably handle any situation you encounter.
Now, do you understand why I can still get this theme song stuck in my head roughly 30 years later? Good. Then again, this is far from the worst music you'll hear on this tape. Need a little refresher? Okay, now that your mind has been sufficiently audio pummeled into submission, let's get ready for the main event, the second video, how to score. More points on Nintendo games with Skip Rogers. Just who the hell is Skip Rogers? Well, according to Skip Rogers was the 1989 World Video Games Champion. Or as Skip would say,
World Video Game Champion.
Now that might seem impressive until you realize that during that championship, the Soviet bloc nations were boycotting the games, meaning Skip never had to square off against the doped-up East German duck hunt team. So I want to start by saying something positive. The guy's got a good voiceover style. Having said that, this video is an absolute train wreck. First off, the title is very on brand for 80s video gaming. How to score more points is the kind of thing an adult whose sole understanding of video games came from Space Invaders would name a Nintendo strategy guide. Rest assured that by 1989, unless the score played some role in the game mechanics or was for the rare competition, most kids no longer gave a shit about the high score in video games. 1989, we had Ninja Gaiden with a story told by cutscenes. We had Golgo 13 where your character could get laid. How's that for scoring, Skip? Seriously though, one of the best things about the title is that 2 of the games on it don't even have scoring anyway. But believe me, the fun is just getting started. The question is, where do you begin? I guess you could start with the fact that sometimes Skip gives the most generic, basic level tips for some of these games.
Jump real fast on these.
Oh really, Skip? Jump real fast? Yeah, I figured that out pretty quickly when I was 6, Skip.
Watch out for the spikes.
Oh, watch out for the spikes. The things that always kill you in one hit in every Mega Man game ever made. Thanks. One consistent thread running through this tape is probably the sad fact that Skip Rogers just doesn't seem to be very good at the games. He gets the job done, sure, but you just don't get the impression that you're watching the World Video Games Champion at play. To illustrate what I mean, let's start with the first game on the tape, Mega Man 2. One of my old favorites that I still play today. This section is extremely short, and it's mostly just advice on beating the bosses. His description of the game is fairly accurate, but here's the thing. Mega Man games have this sort of rock, paper, scissors system, where each boss is vulnerable to a specific weapon of another boss. This means that in every game, there's a certain optimal order you want to play through. Before getting into Skip's unconventional approach to this, I have to take a cheap shot here.
There are 9 missions, each against a different evil creature. After you complete each mission in order, you get a power from the creature you destroyed.
Creatures? They're robots, Skip. If you know nothing else about Mega Man, he's a robot who fights other robots. Anyway, Skip starts off with Metal Man, which is the preferred way to start Mega Man 2. The boss's Metal Blade weapon is good against several other bosses. What's crazy though is how he had to use his one energy tank on this boss.
And here's how you fight Metal Man. Now I'm getting an energy refill.
Just a rule of thumb, energy tanks in Mega Man are something you want to be saving for the latter parts of the game. I'd usually save them only for the final bosses. Things don't get really weird until he goes to Airman stage without first getting the Leaf Shield weapon from Woodman stage.
Jump the tornadoes to kill Airman.
Then he fights Airman with the default weapon for some reason. Here's what it looks like when you're doing this the right way. Then, despite having Airman's weapon, which kills Crashman in a few hits, he again uses the default weapon. Then he goes to Heatman stage, and again, default weapon when he already has the weapon that would defeat him in a few hits. By far the weirdest part is when he fights Woodman and he tells you this.
To kill the Woodman, watch out for his shield, and don't use the metal weapon.
Okay, now in truth, Mega Man boss vulnerabilities aren't always intuitive, but in this case, it's very intuitive. He's Woodman. Metal blade cuts wood. Observe. Now, I mean, you can play the game however you want, but like I said, it's a little bit weird that the World Video Games Champion would do things this way. I don't know, maybe it's just because he's so good at Mega Man 2.
To get past this guy, jump out, then jump back.
On second thought, probably not. Here's how a non-champion like myself would pull this off. Where's my trophy? Next we have the first set of Skip's tips. These are almost always super rudimentary and vague. Let's see, do the levels in order? Well, he kind of did that. He says use the special weapons, but he neglected to do so even when he had the ones he needed. And those last two kind of work for any video game. Okay, next is the ultra popular NES hit, Platoon. Now, I don't have much to say about this section other than how messed up is it that they made an NES adaptation of Platoon? And when I say adaptation, this is one case where they kind of followed the source material and, well, yikes. Jesus, Nintendo, way to be the family-friendly video game company. There's just one part in this segment I've got to highlight because it sounds so hilarious. Namely, it's this part where Skip acts like the ability to jump over bullets in a video game is something unusual.
Believe it or not, you can jump over bullets.
Come on, dude, you were just playing Mega Man. Then we come to Skip's tips for Platoon with helpful advice such as, the fourth level is tough. Yes, Skip, the last stage of a video game tends to be tough. It's called a difficulty curve. Next up is Top Gun, a far less horrifying movie adaptation. Skip begins by telling you what missiles to use for each mission, although he never really explains why.
Make sure you pick the right missiles. Use the 111 for the training mission, the Tigers for mission 2, and the Hawks for missions 3 and 4.
The best part of this segment is landing. If you've never played Top Gun on the NES, landing is the hardest part of the game. You can breeze through the first level and still easily lose by screwing up the landing. What makes this section great is when World Video Games Champion shows great humility by pointing out that yes, even he misses a landing from time to time.
Landing is the hardest part of the game. Even Skip Rogers misses a landing now and then.
That message really meant a lot to me. Someone who has probably never successfully landed the plane in Top Gun. Then we move on to Skip's tips where he tells us not to be afraid of landing, which is, incidentally, probably the only thing you ever need to be afraid of in this dumb game. Next we have Wizards and Warriors, a game I never played much, but thanks to this tape I came to associate it with really annoying music. Okay, not that annoying. I don't have much to say here apart from the fact that Skip seems to get hit a lot, and he also sometimes has this really funny intonation when describing certain items.
You'll also be able to get the Wand of Wonder. And, very important, here's the Cloak of Darkness. Here's how it works. This is a very important chest. It holds the feather fall, which you'll need to win the game. It makes you fall very gently. The cuckoo clocks don't help very much. They make everyone freeze for a few seconds.
Gee, Skip, the ability to freeze enemies for a few seconds kinda sounds useful in a game like this. Maybe that's why several more popular games like Castlevania and Super Mario Bros. 2 had similar items. Next we come to Skip's tips, where it looks like he's transitioned from game advice to life advice with such gems as have patience. And now we come to the main event, because here we have one of the games featured in the previous tape, so we can actually compare the two. This time, we're going to see Metal Gear played by a world champion. What sucks here is right in the intro, Skip spoils some of the big reveals at the end of the game. See, Metal Gear didn't have a super convoluted plot like the later games, but it has one big twist that he basically just gives away.
And don't believe the map you get or what you hear on the radio. You'll find a lot of misinformation.
And it's only going to get worse from here. So remember how earlier we were talking about the problem of showing isolated bits of the game so that the guide is only marginally more helpful than screenshots in a normal strategy guide? Well, take a look at this unedited clip from this segment.
Use your gun here.
Okay, where is that exactly?
Get card number 2. Get rations 3 times.
Where?
Use card 2 to get a hint.
How? Where?
Get the missiles.
Where are these missiles?
Put on the gas mask right away. Get more ammo.
Where's this ammo?
Use card 2 to rescue this guy. It helps you gain points. Get the silencer. Get the grenade launcher. Rescue this guy and get a clue.
As if this weren't bad enough, Skip doesn't seem to know about how to take out the electrified floors, as they demonstrated in the other video. Instead, his method is to load up on rations and hope he doesn't run out of health. Worse still, he doesn't tell you any of the game's most vital steps. Talking to Petrovich's daughter, talking to Petrovich, none of that. You literally cannot complete the game unless you do that. They point this out in the previous video. Instead of actually telling you what you need to do, he just stops the tape when you have the entire inventory, as though the sole purpose of Metal Gear is to collect items like some kind of scavenger hunt.
And you've got the entire inventory. Good luck.
Anyway, after finishing with Metal Gear, Skip signs off.
Happy gaming!
So that's it. 2 examples of how the VHS and home video game revolutions converged at the end of the 80s. And while they're undeniably corny and cringeworthy, it really helps you appreciate what we have today. Now when you're having trouble with a game, you just open a YouTube tab and you find a full 100% walkthrough in seconds. Back then, all we had was some self-proclaimed world video games champion telling us to avoid bullets and warning us that the last level is tough. But you know, as I take this stroll down memory lane, I can't help but think that there's some unfinished business I need to attend to. Something I've put off for far too long. And I think it's time to rectify that. Yes! Finally, after all these years! Alright folks, so that's the video review. I am required by law to say that I am not actually a qualified pilot, and you should not take any of my advice on aviation. That being said, I am qualified to ask you to click like and subscribe and hopefully share the video online. And if you look down in the video description below, you'll see the Patreon link where you can help support my work. And I know you want to do that, because one way you can score more points in the game of life is by donating to my Patreon page. So that's all for now. I'll see you next time.